When Karen Whitmore from the HOA stood in my driveway, red-faced and waving a clipboard like it was a badge of honor, I knew the day was about to go sideways. This garage extension violates Community Aesthetic Ordinance 23, Section 4. She snapped, jabbing a French manicured finger toward the frame I just started laying out. I leaned on my shovel, sweat dripping off my brow. Karen, it's still just a wood outline. You haven't even seen the plans. I don't need to. Garages are limited to 1 car capacity unless explicitly approved, she said, smug as ever. And the board met. Your request is denied. I took a breath. That's funny. The board met? When? Last night, she said proudly, flipping through her paperwork. Funny. I'm on the board. Nobody told me. She blinked. It was a special meeting. Of course it was. Karen had been gunning for control since she moved in 2 years ago. She had a way of bending the HOA guidelines to suit her whims, and most of the neighborhood didn't push back. They didn't want the drama. But me? My name's Xander Wallace. I don't do quiet compliance, especially not when I know someone's bluffing. You can't just call secret meetings and make decisions without the full board, I said. Karen straightened her shoulders like she was posing for a mugshot. We followed the bylaws. If you have a problem, take it up with the landowner. I almost laughed. You mean the company the HOA leases the common land from? You sure about that? She nodded, already turning away like the matter was settled. Appeal denied. Any further construction will result in daily fines. She left with her usual flair, storming off in heels too high for the sidewalk and barking at a jogger about weeds in his flower bed. I stood there, staring at the outline of my would-be extension. I wasn't building a car showroom. Just needed a little more space for my tools and a second car now that my nephew was living with me. But Karen had made it her mission to squash anything she didn't personally approve of. And here's the thing. Karen and the HOA didn't actually own the land under the community clubhouse, pool, or green spaces. That land? It belonged to a holding company, Vanguard Properties LLC. Most residents didn't know that, but I did. Because my uncle, Xander Wallace, owned Vanguard. And Karen? Karen had no idea. I hadn't needed to play that card before. I believed in letting people hang themselves with their own rope. But this time she'd pushed too far. I wasn't just going to build my garage, I was going to expose everything she'd been pulling behind the scenes. I headed inside, pulled up the lease agreement from my emails, and called Victor. Zan. What's up? He said, cheerful as ever. You still own the land under Glenridge Estates? Sure do. Why? You mind if I send you a lease amendment? He paused. They causing trouble again? Karen's back at it. Just rejected my garage extension at a secret meeting. Victor sighed. Send me the paperwork. I'll fix it. Also, I added, I think it's time we reviewed the rent. There was a chuckle. Ooh. You're mad. Just enough. I hung up and got to work. I wasn't going to bulldoze the HOA with threats. No, I was going to let Karen walk right into her own mess. The next day, I drove past the pool and saw Karen holding court with her usual circle, Diane, Marcia, and Linda. All of them sipping iced coffee like they were at a country club instead of a neighborhood park. They stopped talking when I pulled up and got out. Xander, Karen said, cloying sweet. I hope you understand that we're just upholding community standards. Sure, I said. I just had a question. You said I could appeal to the landowner, right? She nodded. Of course, but I doubt they'll care about a garage. Well, you're in luck, I said. Because he cares a lot. Especially about people holding unauthorized meetings and breaking lease agreements. The smiles faded. What are you talking about? Marcia asked. I pulled out a copy of the lease agreement and handed it to Karen. Section 6, Paragraph 2. Any community decisions affecting structural development must be disclosed to the landowner within 5 business days. You've never done that. Not once. Karen's lips tightened. This is ridiculous. Also, I added, Xander Wallace, he's the landowner. My uncle. Diane actually gasped. Linda dropped her cup. Karen stared at me like I just slapped her. You're bluffing, she finally said. Call the number on the lease, I said, walking back to my truck. Oh, and Karen? You might want to check your mailbox tomorrow. Sure enough, the next day, Every board member received a letter from Vanguard Properties. The lease was being renewed with a new rent rate, doubled, effective immediately, and the best part? The clause about lease termination if the HOA violated community trust? That was now highlighted. Karen tried to rally the troops, but the mood in the neighborhood was shifting fast. Suddenly, people remembered every fine she'd ever handed out, every nasty letter about lawn height, every time she'd parked her SUV in front of someone else's driveway during HOA inspections. By the weekend, I had neighbors offering to help pour concrete for my extension, no permit needed. When Karen showed up with a cease and desist, I handed her a notarized letter from Victor himself. Per the landowner, I said, this build is fully authorized. She snatched the paper and stormed off without a word. But I wasn't done with her yet. Not even close. Because once I looked deeper into HOA finances, I found something worse than petty fines and secret meetings. I found missing money. Tens of thousands in miscellaneous maintenance and consulting fees with no receipts. All signed off by Karen. And now, I had every reason to take her down for good. By Monday afternoon, the real fallout began. It wasn't the rent hike that got the board scrambling, it was the audit notice. Victor had quietly brought in a forensic accountant, a silver-haired bulldog named Elliot Crane. He didn't wear a suit. He wore a windbreaker and scuffed loafers, and he showed up at the HOA office with a rolling suitcase full of financial reports and a clipboard that looked like it had survived several wars. When Elliot walked into the HOA's conference room, he didn't announce himself. He just started opening drawers, flipping through binders, and making notes. I watched from my truck across the street, sipping coffee as Karen pulled up, saw him, and froze. She stood on the sidewalk for a second, then marched in with her usual clipped stride. 15 minutes later, she came back out, phone glued to her ear, eyes darting like a cornered animal. My phone buzzed. It was Victor. She's trying to reach out to the holding company's legal rep, wants to clarify some terms, he said. Let her spin, I answered. She'll dig her own hole. Elliot wasn't just there to look at numbers. He was cross-referencing expenditures with city permits, vendor licensing, and bank transfers. That's when things got ugly. By Tuesday morning, Elliot emailed a summary to Victor. I got a copy too. The document was only 4 pages, but it read like a crime novel. $42,000 in landscape upkeep paid to a company that didn't exist. Another $23,000 to a consultant whose address traced back to a P.O. box in another county. The kicker? The signatures on the checks were all Karen's. Marcia had co-signed 3 of them. I didn't know much about finance law, but I knew enough to recognize embezzlement when I saw it. I forwarded the whole document to a friend of mine, Detective Rhonda Mendez. We went to high school together, and she owed me a favor after I helped her brother get a job at my nephew's auto shop. She called me within an hour. This is bad, she said bluntly. Real bad. You want this investigated properly. I want it done right. I'll start the paperwork. But if you hear anything about them shredding documents or moving files, you call me immediately. I didn't have to wait long. That night, while walking my dog past the HOA office, I noticed the interior lights were on. The building was supposed to be closed after 7. I ducked behind the hedges and watched through the blinds. Inside, Karen stood at the copy machine, hurriedly feeding stacks of paper into the shredder. Marcia hovered near the door, glancing out every few seconds. I pulled out my phone and hit record. The next morning, Rhonda showed up with 2 officers and a warrant. They didn't knock. They walked straight in and started collecting evidence. Karen wasn't there, she'd left early, but Marcia was, and she turned ghost white the second she saw the badge. They seized all the computers, the bank statements, and the HOA's transaction logs. Rhonda texted me later that night, we have enough. The DA's getting involved. By Thursday, the neighborhood buzzed like a kicked hornet's nest. Rumors spread fast, someone said the HOA was broke, someone else claimed the pool fund had been stolen. Nobody knew the full story, but everyone knew something big was coming. I stayed quiet. Let the noise build. That weekend, a special community meeting was called in the clubhouse. Karen tried to cancel it by claiming a security concern, but Victor overrode her technically. It was still his property, and he now required all HOA meetings to be recorded and open to residents. I arrived early, took a seat in the back, and watched the room fill. Neighbors who'd never cared about HOA drama before now whispered to each other in tight groups. Even the Harveys, who hadn't attended a meeting in over 5 years, showed up with folding chairs and a thermos of coffee. Karen walked in late, flanked by Marcia and Diane. She didn't look smug this time. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed, her lips tightly pressed together. She didn't speak until someone from the back asked the question everyone was thinking. Is it true the HOA's under investigation? Karen adjusted her scarf and said, there has been a misunderstanding involving financial documentation. We are cooperating fully with local authorities. That was the wrong thing to say. A man near the front, Greg, the retired firefighter, stood up. Misunderstanding? You've been fining people for mailbox paint but siphoning off thousands to fake companies? My wife's been fighting you over a rose bush for 3 months while you're stealing from the pool fund. It's more complicated, Marcia began, but she was drowned out by angry voices. I waited until the room quieted, then stood. I have something to add, I said, holding up a folder. These are copies of the payments made to the shell companies. They're not misunderstandings. They're crimes. Karen's jaw clenched. These were uncovered by a forensic accountant hired by the landowner, I continued. And yes, that landowner is my uncle. But this has nothing to do with my garage anymore. This is about the fact that the people managing our community have been abusing your trust. A few people applauded. Others just nodded grimly. Tomorrow morning, I added, charges will be filed. If you've had unexplained fines, if you've paid for permits that were never issued, or if you've had your appeals mysteriously lost, you might want to talk to the police. Karen opened her mouth, but this time, nobody listened. People began talking over her, calling for a vote to suspend the board, to appoint an interim treasurer, to open the books to the community. Someone shouted to cut off all HOA payments until an external audit was completed. The meeting dissolved into chaos, but the kind of chaos that meant change. By Monday, investigators had confirmed at least 6 fraudulent payments tied directly to Karen. Marcia flipped first, agreeing to hand over documents in exchange for leniency. Diane tried to claim ignorance, but her signature appeared on 2 of the consulting checks. Karen was arrested the following Wednesday. She didn't go quietly, of course. She accused everyone of conspiring against her, shouted about defamation, and even tried to pin it all on the HOA's accountant, a quiet man named Philip who'd quit 2 years prior after creative differences. The police weren't buying it. Once she was gone, the board dissolved itself under pressure from the residents. A temporary committee was formed, and I was asked to sit on it. I didn't want power, I just wanted to make sure the next group in charge wasn't built on secrets and fear. The first thing we did? Repealed every fine issued over the past 6 months. The second? Voted to make all future meetings public with minutes posted online and financials reviewed quarterly by a third-party CPA. As for the garage, finished it in 3 days with help from neighbors. Not a single complaint. We even had a little cookout afterward, burgers, lemonade, the works. It felt like the neighborhood was breathing again. No more clipboard inspections. No more whispered threats. Just the sound of kids playing, dogs barking, and the occasional power drill as people started fixing up their homes the way they always wanted to. Sometimes power isn't about how loud you are. Sometimes it's about knowing exactly which wire to cut to turn the whole thing off. 2 weeks after Karen's arrest, the neighborhood felt different. Not just quieter, but lighter, like someone had cracked a window in a stale room. For the first time in years, people were talking to each other without glancing over their shoulders. Lawn chairs reappeared on front porches. Kids chalked up the sidewalks again. It was like the place remembered how to breathe. But I wasn't celebrating yet. Not when the surface had barely been scratched. Victor had received a letter from the county clerk's office, one that didn't come through the usual channels. It was addressed to him personally, and it contained something I never expected to see, a land usage variance request submitted by the HOA 6 months ago. It had been signed not just by Karen, but by a man named Alan Darren, listed as the development consultant. Victor didn't recognize the name. Neither did I. But the attached documentation showed that the HOA had applied for permission to subdivide the community greenbelt, the same land our kids used for soccer games and Easter egg hunts. The plan was to rezone it into multi-use parcels, which meant townhouses or retail space. Victor handed the papers to me without saying a word. He didn't have to. I knew what he was thinking. They were trying to sell it off behind everyone's back, I said. He nodded. And they didn't have the authority. Not without my approval. I sat down at the kitchen table and started cross-checking the forms. The signature on the approval line, a forged version of Victor's name, had been notarized by someone in the next county over. The notary's stamp was real, but the actual signature? Sloppy. Someone had traced it, probably from an old lease document. They forged your name, I said. They were going to sell the land out from under everyone. Victor took out his phone and called Elliot, the accountant. I didn't hear the whole conversation, just the tone. Come at first, then clipped, then dead silent. When he hung up, he looked over at me and said, Elliot pulled up a wire transfer from 2 months ago. $50,000 went from the HOA's operating fund to a private escrow account. That account belongs to a holding group managed by Alan Darren. Escrow for a land deal, I said. But the board never approved it. Because there was no board vote, Victor said. This wasn't an investment. This was a sale. We had fraud, forgery, and theft. But now it was entering a new territory, criminal conspiracy. Rhonda came by that evening. She brought an officer from the district attorney's office with her, a clean-cut guy with a folder full of sealed evidence bags. They didn't stay long, just long enough to collect the notarized documents and get a sworn statement from Victor. I walked them out to the driveway. Do you think she acted alone? I asked. Rhonda shook her head. No chance. Someone else knew about this. A realtor, maybe? Could have been a developer fishing for under-the-table deals. The DA's rep added, we're issuing warrants for Alan Darren and 2 others tied to the escrow account. If we can prove intent to defraud the landowner and misappropriate HOA funds, charges go federal. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't just about a garage extension anymore. It wasn't even about Karen. This was about someone trying to gut an entire neighborhood for personal gain. I didn't sleep much that night. Just sat in my garage, listening to the hum of the new lighting I'd installed, thinking about how close they'd come to pulling it off. The next day, I paid a visit to the old records room in City Hall. It was a dusty, half-forgotten place in the basement, where property records went to die. I was looking for anything that mentioned Alan Darren, or any rezoning applications tied to Glenridge Estates. What I found instead was something worse. A building permit from 8 months ago, flagged for utility consultation, had been submitted under the HOA's name. It listed a planned installation of underground cabling along the southern edge of the greenbelt, right where the proposed townhouses were supposed to go. The permit had been approved, which meant someone with access had been laying the groundwork for months. And now that I knew what to look for, I started to see it everywhere. Survey stakes near the eastern fence line, a new circuit box installed beside the maintenance shed, even a patch of recently disturbed soil behind the tennis courts where no one had ever planted anything. They hadn't just planned to sell the land. They'd started prepping it for development. I took photos, documented every marker, every serial number on the electrical boxes, and sent it all to Rhonda. By the time the sun went down, she'd already issued a request for the utility company's subcontractor logs. That night, she called me with an update. They used a shell company to file the permits. Darren's name is all over it. So is Marcia's. She was listed as the project liaison. I leaned against the garage door. You're telling me this goes deeper than Karen? Karen was the face, Rhonda said. But the money? The real power? It came from Darren and whoever's backing him. The next morning, Marcia tried to leave town. She was picked up outside a gas station 2 counties over, suitcase in hand. No resistance, just a quiet surrender. Her arrest made the local paper. So did the revelation that she'd been collecting undeclared payments from a development firm registered through a Nevada P.O. box. The community was stunned. But it wasn't outrage anymore. It was resolve. At the emergency HOA meeting that weekend, Victor stood in front of the residents not as a landowner, but as a neighbor. "I bought this land because I believed in what this community could be," he said. Karen and her collaborators tried to turn it into a business deal. But that's over now. Effective immediately, I'm donating the Greenbelt to the city under a conservation easement. It'll be protected land forever. The room erupted. Not in applause, though there was some of that, but in something deeper. Relief. Gratitude. A sense that maybe this time they'd won something bigger than just their backyard. I didn't speak during the meeting. I let Victor handle it. But afterward, people came up to me. Not to thank me. Just to talk. About their homes, their families, their plans for the summer. It felt normal. Later that week, I got a call from a woman named Teresa. She lived 3 streets over and had avoided HOA meetings for years out of frustration. But now she wanted to help. Not just attend meetings, but actually join the new board. People used to be scared to speak up, she said. Now they just need someone to show them how. We walked the neighborhood together that weekend, knocking on doors, handing out flyers for the upcoming board elections. No hidden agendas, no backroom deals. Just neighbors trying to reclaim their community. As for the investigation, it went national within days. The developers tied to Darren's shell company had done this before at least 3 other neighborhoods in different states. The federal charges were stacking up, and Karen, despite her best efforts to cut a deal, was going to trial. The last time I saw her was on the courthouse steps. She didn't look at me. Just kept her chin high, surrounded by attorneys, walking into a courtroom that didn't care about her clipboard or her rules. That night, I sat in my garage again. Only now it was finished. Tools hung neatly along the wall. The second car fit perfectly. The space was mine, built with the help of a community that had rediscovered its spine. I turned off the light and stepped outside. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and barbecue. Somewhere down the block, a group of kids were chasing each other with glow sticks. Porch lights flicked on, one by one. No one feared the HOA anymore. Because the HOA wasn't a weapon anymore. It was ours. The night before the board elections, the neighborhood pulsed with a quiet anticipation. There weren't any banners or campaign signs, just open conversations on porches. Neighbors walking door to door with ballots in hand, and a sense that this time, their voices actually mattered. The interim committee had done their job well, organizing transparent elections, publishing the candidate list online, and making sure every resident knew their vote counted. I wasn't running. I'd made that clear from the beginning. My role had been to clean out the rot, not take a seat at the table. But I had my eye on who was. Teresa, the woman from 3 streets over, had emerged as a steady voice of reason, sharp, articulate, and respected by just about everyone. She'd been the one who suggested term limits for board members and proposed a cap on discretionary spending, 2 ideas that gained serious traction. As the sun set, I walked the neighborhood one last time, not campaigning, just observing. The clubhouse lights were on, casting a warm glow across the lot. Inside, volunteers were counting ballots, 2 from each street, all selected by random draw. No closed doors, no power posturing. Just people doing the work. Victor met me on the sidewalk near the clubhouse. "They're finishing up," he said, glancing toward the windows. I nodded. "Feels different now." "It is," he replied. "You made it happen." "No," I said. "They did. I just gave them a flashlight." We stood there a while longer, saying nothing until the doors opened and the volunteers posted the results on a corkboard just outside. Teresa had won by a landslide. So had a retired school principal named Gerard and a young nurse named Leah who'd been quietly organizing community safety patrols for months. Every single elected member was someone who hadn't been involved with the previous board. The crowd clapped politely, but there was no cheering, no grandstanding. Just nods, handshakes, and a strange kind of reverence. They all knew how close they'd come to losing everything. I turned to leave, already thinking about the work ahead for the new board, repairing trust, rebuilding the reserve fund, untangling the remaining legal knots from Karen's tenure. But I didn't get far before Leah caught up to me. "I need to show you something," she said, holding out her phone. We stepped off the path under a street lamp. She pulled up a video from her home security system, one she'd installed after a string of suspicious incidents last year. The footage showed a tall man in a hoodie walking up to her house at 2 in the morning. He didn't knock. He left an envelope in the mailbox and walked away. "What's in it?" I asked. She handed me the envelope. Inside was a folded letter typed in courier font. The message was short. "You think this is over? We built this system. You're just squatting in it." I exhaled slowly, then read the letter again. No signature. No return address. "Could be a leftover threat from before the arrests," I said. "Or someone who didn't get caught." "I thought that too," Leah said, "until I checked my neighbor's feed." She swiped to another video. Same man, same hoodie, different house. This time he didn't leave anything. He took something, a folder from the mailbox, tucked it inside his coat, and ran. I called Rhonda. She answered on the first ring. "We've got a problem," I said. "Someone's poking around." She was at the clubhouse in 15 minutes. We met in the back lot, away from the crowd. Leah showed her the videos, and within seconds Rhonda was calling in a unit. "Whoever this is," she said, "they're not just leaving messages. They're gathering information, possibly trying to track who's working with us." "What do you want us to do?" Leah asked. "Nothing," Rhonda replied. "We'll handle it. You just keep doing what you're doing. But if anyone sees this guy again, call it in immediately. Don't engage." That night, patrol cars circled the neighborhood twice. Nothing happened, but I had a feeling it wasn't over. The next morning, Victor forwarded me an email from one of his legal contacts. It was an alert about a quiet land transaction request submitted to the county zoning board. The name on the application? Alan Darren's brother, Gregory Darren. The parcel in question? A strip of wooded land just outside the neighborhood's perimeter, technically still under Victor's holding company but zoned differently, utility infrastructure. The application aimed to convert it into a private access road. I drove out there myself. The land was tucked behind a row of maintenance sheds, overgrown and forgotten. But someone had cleared a path recently. The grass was flattened, and a few survey flags dotted the edges. I took photos, marked the coordinates, and sent them to Rhonda. She called me back that afternoon. "We just got approval to tap Darren's phone records," she said. "Guess who he's been calling?" I already knew the answer. "Gregory. And a guy named Elias Kearns," she added. "Developer out of Arizona. Been linked to 2 other HOA embezzlement cases. Never charged, but always hovering around the edges." "You think they're regrouping?" "I think they're trying to find another angle. And they're getting desperate." That night, a power outage hit the eastern side of the neighborhood. Not long, maybe 20 minutes, but enough to knock out a few security systems, including Leah's. When the power returned, one of the community tool sheds had its padlock cut, and the interior was trashed. Nothing was stolen, just papers scattered, cabinets overturned. The message was clear. We reported everything, every incident, every file, every video. Rhonda escalated it to the state attorney's office. They brought in a task force. Within days, Gregory Darren was picked up on charges of attempted fraud and criminal trespassing. His phone had geotags placing him at the tool shed during the blackout. But the real win came when they searched Elias Kearns' home. They found blueprint schematics for a new development that included parcels from Glenridge Estates. The plans were dated over a year prior, with notes referencing pending board cooperation and greenbelt conversion. Handwritten annotations listed payment schedules, HOA policy revisions, and even projected profit margins. The depth of the scheme was staggering. Kearns had built a playbook, one he'd used in other neighborhoods, relying on corrupt board members to slowly shift community policies, push rezoning efforts quietly, and then cash out once buyers were lined up. Karen and her crew had been following that playbook word for word. But this time they'd failed. The arrests made headlines. Not just local ones, regional outlets picked up the story, especially after it was tied to prior cases. Kearns was charged with conspiracy to defraud, wire fraud, and racketeering. Gregory Darren faced state charges, and Karen's case was now part of a much larger federal investigation. After the dust settled, the neighborhood held one final meeting, not in the clubhouse, but in the park. Folding chairs circled under the old oaks. No microphones, no agenda, just a community gathering to talk, reflect, and move forward. Teresa stood and spoke briefly, thanking everyone for their resilience. She outlined the board's next steps: a partnership with a local nonprofit to manage green space upkeep, a rotating resident review panel for financial decisions, and a public archive of all meeting recordings. When she finished, she turned to me. "You started this," she said. "You held the line when most of us didn't even know there was a fight." I shook my head. I just didn't want to lose my garage. That got a few laughs. The good kind. The kind that meant people weren't afraid anymore. As the sun dipped below the trees, I looked around at the faces, neighbors who'd once been strangers, now allies. People who'd stopped whispering complaints and started demanding answers. People who'd taken the system back. And I realized something. I hadn't just built an extension on my garage. I'd helped tear down a machine designed to keep people quiet, compliant, and in the dark. Now they weren't in the dark anymore, and the lights were staying on.